Lord, help us to hear these words of Isaiah spoken to people so long ago. May they be fresh in our ears this morning. In your precious name, amen. So this is a vision, a prophecy that Isaiah offered to the people a long time ago, at a time when the nation of Israel was being oppressed from all sides. They'd suffered military defeats, and politics in Israel were getting quite fraught, and the nation was really quite beleaguered. Things were tough externally, and as is so often the case, that can trigger things to be tough internally as well, and there was a sense that injustice was on the rise, and the systems of the people of Israel were starting to fail. A nation that had been built as a confederate of tribes, a very egalitarian kind of setup, an empowered people with a sense of shared responsibility, had become increasingly dysfunctionalised by their politics and what was going on, especially as they sought to be just like the nations all around them that were intimidating them. And so after a time of quite a lot of suffering and losing their way, this prophecy, this vision from Isaiah comes. God sees them. And this is the most amazing grace. Sometimes we don't know how much we need to be saved. We're just getting on with the day-to-day things of life. We're getting through Monday, and then we're getting through Tuesday, and we're getting through the next day. Perhaps there's moments of respite days, weekends where we have some fun. But for the most part, we're stuck with our heads down, and we're just doing life and keeping on going, doing what we feel we need to do to survive. And in a hostile environment, that becomes all the more the case. There's no space to consider alternatives. If the budget is tight or if things seem to be a bit insecure, we just keep our heads down and keep going. It's kind of almost too distressing to acknowledge what's actually going on for us. And when someone shows a little bit of kindness towards us, we can begin to see ourselves through their eyes, and things can start to shift. Isaiah wants the people to know that God sees them. He's speaking gently to them, calling to them. He not only sees them, but he is concerned for them. God can see everything. There's no pretending in this. There's no pretending that everything's good, or that the people of Israel have always been just righteous people and this kind of thing. There's an acknowledgement of the reality. They are seen through and through, and accepted and loved, and this is the best place of all that you can be. It's a wonderful liberty. And God invites the people to see themselves as well. And this is really the challenge. It's a challenge for us, I think, to allow ourselves to see ourselves the way that God sees us. To see the things that are hidden from us most of the time, things that are hidden mostly because we don't want to see them, or we resist accepting the value that they hold. Our God invites us to share the divine perspective and acknowledge who we are through and through, to not pretend we're something that we're not, but to see all of who we are and to know that we are accepted and loved, and in a sense to accept ourselves and love ourselves in that sense too. We don't need to pretend to ourselves either. I think that grace is the space that takes us beyond fear. We spend too much time living instinctually, kind of moving around the things that we're concerned about, being triggered by fears and this kind of thing. And we don't even take time to realise what's motivating us a lot of the time. I heard a story this week about two people working in a workplace situation, and it was a very tricky situation to do with some workplace relationships. And one of the people was really shouldering the burden of this. There was a genuine concern about all the people involved, and they wanted it to work out well, and they were carrying this immense burden. And the other person could see them starting to really strain and said, this isn't all on you to carry. It's not your responsibility. The other people have responsibility in this as well. And when that person heard that, they just started to cry with relief. Because when the pressure's on, we just got to get it done. But when someone else can see us and express to us a point of view that's outside of our trapped mentality, that comes to us as grace if we can hear it. And in a sense, I think this is what Isaiah's prophecy and vision is about. God saying, you don't have to keep behaving as if you're under siege. You are loved. There's going to be a future and a hope. And grace provides a safe space for us to become aware and enter into what's going on rather than resisting and having our back up against it all the time. And Isaiah speaks about a way where there was no way, a way in the wilderness, a highway in the wilderness. Now, all the greenies amongst us will go, we don't want highways in the wilderness. And that's not what's being proposed here. In the time of Isaiah, of course, the wilderness was a hostile and dangerous place. If you wandered off into the wilderness, there's a very good chance you wouldn't wander back again. There weren't lots of resources out there. You didn't have fixed maps that indicated where the water holes were or safe drinking or where the hostile tribes might be or the wild animals or all this kind of stuff. So the wilderness kind of hemmed you in. It was the part that performed a bit of a natural border for where you could and couldn't go. Setting out across the wilderness was just a silly and dangerous thing to do if you were not well prepared. And here Isaiah talks about a way being made where there is no way currently. And this is something that would have resonated for the people of Israel because you'll remember, that's not all of Israel of course, but you remember the pathway out of Egypt, and they got caught at the Red Sea and there was no way, and God opened a way where there was no way. And I imagine as Isaiah said this, the people are going, a way where there is no way. How God does that, that's right. We're not hemmed in. Even though we can't see the way, God will provide a way through. Now, of course, there are ways and there are ways. And any path can be intimidating if we don't know the way and we're not sure what's going to be found around the next corner. There might be all kinds of potential threats there, and even if we can kind of see it, it really helps if there's somebody who knows the way, who can show us the way. Even in our day of GPS navigation in the car, have you got those sorts of things, or your phone? It's still very difficult sometimes following those sorts of things. We have a lot of friends on the north side and we give them directions about how to come off the harbour bridge, and then you've got to go towards the western distributor, but take the left exit and then move right across so you don't end up on there, and they'll go right, and the GPS is there, but it all happens so quickly that before you know it, you can be heading off down Anzac Bridge and you've got to do the big loop around and come back again. In fact, nearly all our friends end up doing that the first time. It's so much easier if there's a car in front of you, so just follow the car in front. Just follow the one in front. Follow the one who knows that is the way. That's what opens the way for us. And for us, of course, Jesus is the person to follow. Not that we should all become carpenters or wear sandals or move to the Middle East, but he's the way in terms of what he values, the way he regards people, the way he treats people and cares for people. That is the way, what is most important in our life and for our life. And this can be hard to see because it's so counter to the culture. I mean, we live in an environment that has been influenced by Christianity and Christian culture, but it's still a world culture. And we know that in business and politics and family life and community life and all sorts of areas, we have this default to do that thing which we think is best for us. to do that thing which is self-protecting, that looks after number one first. And I think this happens in the most smallest of areas, where there's another way to see it, but we can't see it because we're so formed by a particular way of seeing it. Like, husbands and wives know this, particularly when you first get married and you encounter your partner doing something a different way, and they'll explain to you all the reasonable reasons why it should be done this way and not the way that you normally do it. And it's quite bewildering, because that doesn't make any sense. You know what the way to do it is, and it's the way you've been doing it for years, and they're the ones that can't see that. And whenever we're formed in a way of thinking through years of experience and so forth, it's very hard to see an alternate way. We just can't see the sense of it quite often. People naturally learn to mitigate risk. We love to be risk averse, although there's some people who love to take risks. I've got a daughter like that. But mostly we like to find the safest way to do life. And yet Jesus calls us to lose our life in order to find our life. And it doesn't make sense to us. We have to listen really, really carefully, because it's counter to our instincts. It's counter to the culture we're formed in, and we find it very difficult to see as a result. But it is a way that is eternal, even if the people don't hold to it, even if the people are like the flowers that fade and the grass that withers. The word of the Lord stands. This way stands beyond those who walk in it. The life-giving truth of this way is not made up by people, and it's not only true when people believe it, and it doesn't become more true the more people believe it, even though it becomes more effective and richer for everyone the more who participate in it. It remains true even if nobody follows it. It lies dormant in the ether, waiting to be picked up again by those who have ears to hear and eyes to see. A bit like when Hilkiah, the high priest, in the time of Josiah, they were doing renovations at the temple. It's a fun little story to read in 2 Kings 22. You can imagine, backyard blitz, or what are those block things where they're doing renovations. They put a hole in the wall and they go, "Ooh, what have we got here?" And they pull out a book of the law that hasn't been known about for generations. And they read about the Passover, and they haven't celebrated Passover for as long as anyone can remember. They go, "Oh, this is quite important." And they start instituting the traditions again. And they breathe new life into the people. They get a sense of who they are and where they've come from, something that had been lost to them, and it comes alive for them in a new way again. These ancient ways remain life-giving, even though nobody had been practicing them. Once they come back, once they're rediscovered, they bring vitality back to the community. And this way is like that. It's eternally good. And it's a way that enables you to see clearly. Isaiah talks about going up on a high mountain and proclaiming it so that everyone can see it. And people do see it, but it's a way that also helps you to see clearly. When we follow this way, every aspect of life becomes a little bit clearer, I believe. Things find their appropriate place. It gives us a way to understand our own motives and actions, and the motives and actions of others as well. We can see whether something is self-giving or self-protecting. We know when we're being self-giving or self-protecting. We can see that sort of stuff. And it's not so that we might feel superior, "Oh, I'm more self-giving than the other person," or anything like that. It's because we all know we're just like each other, really. And it helps us make helpful decisions, and to assess our unhelpful decisions and understand why they're unhelpful and so forth. And it is a way that is clearly seen by all people as well. In one sense, we barely need to be taught this way because we kind of know it, we long for it, it's in us in one sense. Last week I went on a multi-faith tertiary chaplaincy conference in Gippsland. And there was only about 35 people as part of that conference, but there was an amazing array of different religions. We had Muslims and Buddhists and Hare Krishna person, and Catholics and Protestants, and a few others who I may not have even caught up with exactly what their persuasion was. But the thing that struck me was how everybody in that environment was at great pains to say the way they expressed their faith was to be very inclusive, to be very centred on the students and the staff that they were trying to serve, to help people work out what's good for them and to live well and this kind of thing. And it struck me that the broad description of the way people were wanting to operate was they were really wanting to be kind of like Jesus. Now, if you look at all those faiths, and I'm not an expert on all of them, but most of the characters in those faiths, they're not the central values of those characters. That's the central values of Jesus. And we kind of know that the self-giving way is the way of life. The Jesus way. So you can be any one of those faiths. I think that's fine. Just practice it in a way like Jesus. And I think that's following Jesus. So there might be some complications with that. But my conviction is it's the way we behave and the values that we express, more importantly than the little story we might be telling, that really matter in the way that we relate to one another. These are the ways that small groups of Christians have championed down through the history of the church and revolutionised every part of the world we now live in. Now, the church has got it wrong more often than it's got it right because we are the people of the world and the church gets power, and Jesus' way is to relinquish power, to not wield power in an unhelpful way. But we've seen what the church can do, every bit as unhelpful as any other institution in humanity. But the Jesus way is a way that all people see and recognise. It enables us to see and recognise as well. So Isaiah's vision has God gently calling to a beleaguered people. There is the offer of a way through where there had been no way previously. In a sense, it's a way that is hidden in plain view because we know that love is a good way to go. We know that. It's just learning how to do it that is the challenge. It's a way that all can see and increasingly want to claim is their own way, but it really is the way of Jesus, I believe. A way that enables us to see everything more clearly and be a blessing in every circumstance to the glory of God. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for these ancient words of Isaiah, promising us a way forward. And we thank you for Jesus who comes and shows us that way, being the one who we can follow through all the complicated paths of life. We thank you that that is a way that is eternal, that it's in a sense plain to see because it's within us, even though we are so formed by another way, and so we find it hard to see. It's a bit of a paradox. So keep opening our eyes that we might see your way of love and follow Jesus to the glory of your name. Amen.